and welcome to Startup Kitchen Talk, where we discuss startup apprentices becoming master chef. Today, my guest is, we're accommodating somebody who is an expert of how to accommodate somebody. Someone to tell us how to put the office in the office. Please welcome Andrew Peirson from IO Partners.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I'm glad that you made it in this weather.
I'm very good on Czech public transport. So
oh, really?
It was a short metro and
Still
a bit
better
of a walk.
than the British one?
Depends on which city you're in. But
Prague?
Yeah. Well, in terms of the public transport, yeah, I think it's. I don't think there's anywhere better than here for that, especially for the price.
So Prague point one. Maybe we will get different minus points in the end. We will see. So what is your office like? Do you have a Prague city view?
Yeah, we're in Myslbek, which is one of the first generation kind of modern buildings in the city. So yeah, we went in there in, I think, 1999 when we first moved into the Czech Republic. So yeah, the first lease was in Deutschmarks, actually, looking through the old papers. So it shows how long we've been there. So yeah, it's kind of been refurbished at different times and slowly updated. So yeah, we've been there a long time. So it's always been our base.
And is corner office still a thing? Do you have your?
Weirdly, we've just refurbished the office, and I have found myself in a corner. I don't have my own office. That's never something I could do. I think I need to be in and around people. So I've never had my own office, but it's I do have a corner office these days. But it's I probably have the worst view in the office. It's just into a courtyard. But
so it is a corner office in the end.
Yeah, my own is. Yeah, I mean we have quite a large office. So it kind of looks out onto Napshikopi, onto the front, and then to the courtyard to the back. But I'm in the back part. But I have a corner. But to be honest, I spend most of my time just.
It's like somebody
wandering.
Put the CEO in the corner.
Exactly. Yeah, hides him in the corner.
So on scale, when on one point we have somebody who has empty real estate, and on the other part we have somebody who needs an office space. So where do you stand? I
mean, I would say in the past we used to be on the side of the landlord more because there was a lot of development going in Prague, a lot of new developers coming in.
That's
and they were kind of look at companies like ours as a way of helping them get through that. So, project managing those buildings, leasing those buildings, then selling them. It's really changed today in Czech that the developers have got better, actually, in terms of their knowledge. They've got big in-house teams, which means they don't need to use consultants as much as they used to. So actually on our side, we're more on the occupiers, I would say. And that's across mainly office and industrial, but in offices, yeah, so it ranges from kind of the big global corporates that we do through JLL down to the clients that we win locally here. So whether it's kind of startups or it's well-established Czech companies or regional companies, I would say 70% of our work is really advising the occupier. And
when did it change? Like the developers learned their work and now they're more sustainable? I think
the developers like in most sectors, they probably look at the costs they're giving out or paying out to consultants and probably try and bring as much of that in-house as possible. Certainly when there's more competition in the market and they're trying to kind of boost their numbers and be more profitable, often they'll look at cutting sometimes on consultant fees. So we fall into that trap. So, if you're a developer, I think pretty much every developer in this market's got an in-house leasing team now. So, we have our competitors, which are our other companies that we compete with doing the same thing we do. But in one essence, actually, the developer and the client's also our competitor because they're trying to lease their office without using someone like us. So actually, it makes it a little bit more difficult.
On average, how long does it take? Like, I need a place to work till I have a place to work.
Look, I always think that anybody that has, say, 100 people, I think they will tend to start looking maybe 18 months before their lease expires because, you've got to. Often those companies will be kind of global European businesses that need approvals, and they take a long time. Designing offices, fitting out offices takes 6 months. So the process usually starts 18 months in advance. I think with smaller companies, anybody of kind of 50 people or below, you're probably looking at a year. But I think really leaving it short term means the only chance you've got is actually taking offices that are fitted out because it takes a long time to fit out offices. It's expensive too. And so I think for smaller companies, you have to start looking at least a year in advance.
So not leave it at the last possible second, you said?
But I mean, if you're a small kind of 10-person business, then you'll always be able to find something. But will you be able to find the office that you dreamed of? Probably not. I think you'll find a home, but it might not be the home of your dreams.
And so what's trendy in the office? Is it still, plants and a lot of plants and industrial design?
Depends. I think if you go to kind of the traditional parts of Prague, like Prague 4, around kind of Pankratz, I think you've got the kind of the traditional corporate occupiers in those places. And there's probably less industrial type space and plants than you would get. I mean, it completely varies. I mean, it's a strange one. I think people expected in the last few years after COVID that everybody would start kind of having these community areas in an office. I think this was where the trend was going, that there'd be less kind of rows of desks and it would be more breakout areas. In my own experience, we went through that and I found that people actually weren't using the breakout areas as much at all. I think that the idea that they would do it, and I think people thought that they would use it more. But in reality, I mean, for instance, in my office, we have a really nice big kitchen and people spend a lot of time in there. But the breakout areas that we created, people weren't using them. And so actually what we've done...
table footballs and ping pong.
We didn't have them, but we had a big breakout room where we had kind of TV, PlayStation, Netflix, these things. People stopped using it. The area in the middle of our office that we created for kind of breakout with sofas and these things, we've now completely taken down and turned into individual meeting rooms. Because people actually, one thing I'm finding in the trend, and I think this is to do with people's behaviour, when I started working, the office was loud and everybody was on the phones and you were dealing with your phone on your desk. That was showing my age, we weren't all on mobile phones. So today, people don't like to have a conversation in front of other people. So my whole office, when I walk around the office, we must have 10, 12 meeting rooms and small kind of breakout areas, phone booths, and they're always full because people, even if they're having a private conversation or work conversation, 99 times out of 100, they'll have to go into a room by themselves.
Is that a Czech thing?
I think more, yeah, actually, because we, when I go around our other offices, I mean, we have an office down in Belgrade, for instance. When I go there, that's loud. Everybody's on the phone in the office and they're quite loud people, I think, more than Czechs. I think Czechs are much more withdrawn and they like the solitude and the quiet. And I think they don't have maybe the confidence levels of some others, maybe kind of the southern parts of the world that are a bit more loud and outspoken. So Czechs like to be hidden away. I honestly agree with everything you said. I hate when people talk loud on the phone next to me. It's like, get a room and let me be. Our office is so quiet. And I think when we do have someone loud, everybody starts moaning that they're too loud, and so people start moving away from them. And so, it's compared to how it used to be. I think almost every office you go to these days is really quiet.
So the trend is less PlayStation, more phone booths.
Yeah, honestly, I think so. Yeah, more solitude, more being in the office, but actually being separated at times. So people are happily sitting in rows of desks. We've got certain departments that do a lot of report writing, and they'll sit there quiet working all day. But yeah, I think it is. It's just I think it's a mix of a confidence thing and just that human behaviour of younger people that maybe don't have the confidence and they kind of like that time by themselves.
Or they just don't like loud people on the phone.
They don't like loud people.
Yeah. And what's a startup specialty? Because you always also work with startups. You help them to find their offices. When they grow, they need more space. They need to accommodate more people. Do they have any specialties?
No, I mean, I think other than location, you're not going to get startups heading out to Prague 4, Stodulki, these types of places. I don't think you'll get people going out to those places. So I know it sounds kind of almost stereotypical for Prague, but startups generally want to be in and around the centre. Karlín, Holešovice are growing increasingly, I feel. Holešovice has a bit of a challenge with public transport, but I think the area's massively improving. So yeah, I don't think they want to be in and around, because a lot of these people will be living in Vinohrady or Karlín in these areas. So they want to be in that area, in that environment. I don't think they want to be going to an office park cafe for lunch. They want to be going to their own small places. So yeah, I wouldn't say they've got a main preference when it comes to the space itself, but I think it's more about the location. And I think that often smaller companies don't want to be in buildings which are just full of big global corporates. that they like to be in and around a lot of the smaller other companies.
Yeah, maybe they want to play the idea that they will never become one.
Maybe rebel against it, but secretly want to be there. So.
But do they have any specifics when it comes to contracts, for example? Because I can imagine they don't want to sign a contract of 3 to 5 years because they are not sure if they're gonna exist in 1 year.
I mean, yeah, I think every company in the world has that problem, whether it's Microsoft, Apple, or a startup in Bratislava or Prague. Like, for me, we've just signed a new 5-year lease. I was really worried how many people we'll have in 5 years. I don't know if that answer is we have 70 now. Is it going to be 70? Is it going to be 100? Will it be 40? Like, I think every company, including the big global companies, look at Prague today. You've got some certainly the big American occupiers in town. And a lot of them have massively downsized in the past few years, massively. So we see these big traditional kind of office parks in Prague that the vacancy increases because global companies, they're staying there, but they're going from 5,000 square meters to 2,000 square meters. I don't think there's many of them are expanding. And if, they're often still moving jobs around and still going to places like India or into cheaper locations. And it's the same with startups. Like a startup, by its very nature, doesn't know how it's going to go. Like they all have the dream that they're going to build into the next Apple, or whether it's here.
So you don't see such a big of a difference.
I think everybody wants the flexibility. I mean, you've got this is where these flex operators are so useful for this side of it, because you can go in and sign 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. Obviously, there'll be a slight cost variance, but how long you can sign up for. But every company has that. I don't think any company today knows how much space they're going to need in 3 years, whether you're in New York or in New Belgrade. Like every company has the same challenge. So I don't think it's just startups.
And if you see those companies, small or big, just reaching for the same places that are, driving the prices up, like Karlín or City Center, do you think that they might be doing a mistake because, signing an expensive lease for such time?
Yeah, there's 2 points to the cost. And I think one of them is the obvious, which is the rent. And that's the one that people talk about the most. The one that people don't talk about the most, which is often the biggest cost, is the fit-out costs. So it's massive. And, construction costs have gone up. I mean, look at offices today in Prague. That for years, the rents never went up, ever. It was always, city centre was 20 euros. Kind of everywhere else was between 12
Where was
12,
I living then?
Everywhere else was 12 to 15. And it never moved. And what caused it to move was construction costs at the start, because it all of a sudden, whether it was COVID, it was the war, it was all these different factors. Construction costs were one of the first things to go up with inflation. And it now costs a lot more money to build an office building than it did before. So the problem with that is, even if you go, and I'll say Prague 4 is another example, Prague 4 office rents was always 14 to 16 euros. That's always what it was for 10, 15 years. You can't build an office building at that rent anymore. The numbers don't work. And so actually the rents are moving initially because to build an office building, you need to be hitting rents of 25 plus in most places. Otherwise, the numbers don't work. You're not going to build an unprofitable development. So that's caused the rents to increase. But really for startups, I think the one thing, and I'm not just saying startups, I think every company misjudges is that fit-out cost, because it's huge. I mean,
by fit-out, we mean desks,
everything. Yeah,
plants,
I mean, it's very
kitchen.
It's very rare that you'll go into an office and you can just start working. I mean, that's the benefit of a flex operator. It's all fitted out. You go in with your laptop and you start work. But if you really want your own office, your own address, your own front door, and it's your own kind of identity, you need to fit the office out. So it's IT costs, it's the carpets, the walls, it's the furniture, it's everything. And honestly, you're talking often 2-3 years lease cost. It's just the fit out. I mean, for some of the big corporates, fit out costs are over 1,000 euros a square meter.
And don't they just overestimate the value of the fit out?
Yeah.
Is it really so important to have, now I'm thinking Karlín, STRV, to have all those plants coming from the wall, reaching the floors, etc.? Is it really something that makes so much of a difference for the employees, do you think?
Yeah, I think everybody has the same target in place. The developers want to lease the office. The office occupiers want to get their people to come to work. And so the more soft things you do, whether it's
Right.
plants or it's better furniture or it's brighter colours or it's everybody has the same aim to get what we call bums on seats. We want people to come into those offices. The developer needs it because he needs his lease being paid, he needs his rent being paid, and the occupier rents an office not for it to be empty. So they'll do what they can to try and entice people in. If that was from my case, we have dogs allowed in the office. Children come in if they need to be in for times. Xboxes, like I said, the TVs, the videos, everything, because it was just.
But then they want phone booths.
I know, but we give them phone booths. We give them
Yeah.
whatever they want, so they come. So they can't say, well, my dog's sick, or these things.
Yeah,
Bring
sure.
it in. Like it, we were always trying to be as open as possible and flexible as possible, to give people, excuse is the wrong word, but to give people no reason not to come, and and I think that's what we all needed. And I think for office buildings, it's the same aim. They're trying to get people to go into those office buildings. And so nobody wants to see empty office buildings. If it means more plants and it means more cost to do that, then that's what needs to be done.
You said that you don't see that startups would have completely different requests than corporates or other companies. So let me ask broadly, what is the most ridiculous request that you've heard from a company?
I wouldn't say it's ridiculous requests in terms of things that people want. I think it's ridiculous requests in terms of the financials that people think that can be achieved, which are just impossible at times. It's just, like I say, a developer's not going to do something if they're going to lose money. And I think people forget that point and don't know where the line is. And so actually what I would say for smaller companies, I think they're a lot more easy and understandable on those points. I think where you get the challenge is often the big global corporates, where you've kind of got decision makers not based in Czech, know really little about the market, and put quite difficult requests on us as an advisor or a landlord. And I think that's the ridiculous request. It's more on the financial expectations that are just impossible.
And for example,
mean, yeah.
marble stairs.
No, it's nothing like that. I wouldn't say it's about the fit out. It's about things like, often. So if you're in an office building, there's two ways you do it, or there's a number of ways you do it, but generally in the past, you would go in and you would sign a 5-year lease and you would get 5 months rent free. And that was it. It was kind of the standard, and there was some fit out included as well, but it was pretty simple. Today, because fit out costs them more, people will sign longer leases, but they'll expect bigger incentives. So, or the other side is if you're renewing your lease, you've already been in for 4 years and you're going to extend for another 3 or 4. Expectations in terms of future rent-free or rent reductions. Our job a lot of the time is to advise the occupier, and a lot of the time we're renewing their lease. We're not moving them into a new building. A lot of the big companies tend to just stay where they are, potentially downsize and renew the lease. Now, what they're struggling to understand is they might currently be paying €17, but actually the market value of the rent level is 25 today. So in essence, the challenge we have is that we get paid by the occupier for advising them to increase their rent. But there's no other way around it, because if you're paying 17 in Prague 1, it's too low today. But it's the same with everything. It's the same with if you're living in an apartment and your rent's going to go up. It's not your landlord being horrible. It's the fact that that's the market value of the space. And so the expectation we have is a lot of our clients is that we're going to still bring them savings, where in reality our job today is to reduce the increase as much as possible. And people need to be a bit more aware of that, I think.
And as a consultant, have you ever, because of the financial perspective, have you ever consult a company, you want to move, but your expectations are unmatchable, so you better stay where you are? Yeah,
all the time.
Really?
I think it's really common. Again, not because of, we've got a few requirements. I mean, look at Prague 1. Prague 1 office rents now are at 28, 30 euros. They're talking now they're going to go up to mid-30s. So there's been almost 100% increase when you get to those levels from where it's been the last 10 years. So again, it's the expectations from people like us that will perform miracles and will get them deals that are where they thought the pricing should be. It's not just reasonable anymore. So,
and isn't it a bit strange, because you mentioned this downsizing of the big corporates like Microsoft, for example, and on the other hand, there are companies that, you mentioned that at the Prague 1, the rent in the last 10 years went up 100%, which is just crazy. So does that make sense? More office space on one, in Prague for Prague 10, I don't know, and on the other hand, 100% rent.
Yeah,
increase.
I mean, it hasn't gone up 100% yet, but I think in the next 3 to 4 years, it will have done. It will have get to that point, and it will be in the kind of mid-30s. But I'm always of the view that Prague's always been under-rented. So I left Prague years ago.
No, a lot of people who would say, "Ouch."
I know, and I think honestly, I think when I look at, I was leasing a flat when I first lived here when I was younger. Then I moved to Bulgaria. My rent was higher there than it was in Prague. I used to run our office in Bucharest, and the rent we were paying there was more than Prague. So Budapest was more than Prague. Warsaw was more than Prague. So actually, Prague. Belgrade was more than Prague. It was the cheapest. There was a lot of stock, and obviously it's all supply demand. So, if supply keeps coming, supply was always exceeding demand to a certain point. Today it's different. There's no supply coming in, and we have a different problem. But when that's the case, you'll never see rental growth. But in some of those other markets, it wasn't endless development, and so we saw rents higher. So actually, I don't think it was right that Prague was always renting at these types of levels when what people would consider inferior markets were actually charging higher rents. And that's for often even for apartments. So I honestly think it was under-rented, and I think it's now just catching up.
Criticized to be very hard to build anything new and to be super expensive. So in your point of view, it's not.
It is really difficult to build, and I know there's a lot of...
comparing to the other cities, it's not as bad.
It is bad, and it's the worst here than out of all the other markets.
Okay.
But I think you've got to look at, I hate saying the word corruption, but it is relevant often in a lot of markets in real estate. And so what you'll find is in kind of newer markets, kind of, parts of the Balkans perhaps in the past. And before all of the issues, Ukraine had issues around it. It was almost too easy to build. It was the opposite of Prague. You could always find a solution to build. You could always find a way to get that permit, which you can't in Prague. And so in those other markets, I remember it's different now and it's massively improved, Bulgaria and Sofia, but in the old days in Sofia, you could almost build anything. There was no limit. They were building a huge amount of office buildings and shopping centres that weren't really needed because it was really easy to get a permit. And there was a lot of Greek banks flooding money in, and it was a crazy time. Prague's always had the challenge of construction permits, but in sometimes that's been quite useful because when the market dips, so when we had the crisis was a great thing to happen in. It sounds weird but it was a great thing to happen in some markets because it stopped the madness and it stopped people building crazy buildings. In this market, because it's always been difficult to build, we've never seen massive oversupply. So that issue around permitting, which is more affecting, I would say, residential. I think for offices, there's never been a case that there's not enough offices in Prague. There's always been vacancy. It's never been that there's zero vacancy. And you need vacancy, otherwise companies can't expand and new companies can't move into the country. So you have to have some vacancy. The problem for Prague is it's more on the residential, that the residential sale prices are going through the roof. But I have to say, and it's probably an unpopular point, I don't feel that Prague rents have ever been particularly high in terms of costs of living. I think that the purchase price ability, and that's a real problem in Czech today with salaries and disposable income and purchase price. But I think that'll just force the mentality shift like you see in places like Germany, the US. People will just rent, and there's nothing wrong with renting. It's not dead money. It just means if you've got money saved, you can spend it on other things. Or you can buy an apartment in a different place. How would you explain this?
Because there's so many of my friends are saying, I am just paying for other people's mortgage. I am just paying paying rent. I'm just paying that person's mortgage and I'm losing money. Yeah. What would be your argument?
In essence, that's essentially is true. But there's one thing that people always forget, I think, especially here, is quality of life. And so I find it amazing that people will buy apartments in places they just don't want to live in, just so they can buy real estate. I'd much prefer to rent a flat in Vinohrady or in Žižkov or Bubenec than moving out to a place I didn't want to live in. But people are doing that. People are buying apartments that are small just to get on the ladder. And I think that it's this old-fashioned view of, I need something for when I stop working or retire that I won't be homeless. I find that amazing to believe that people still think like that. I've got friends who've lived in Germany who've never owned an apartment and they live fine. And I think it's just a different mentality. London, most of the friends I've got in London still don't own their apartments or houses, and they go through life like that. So I think you can park money and invest money in different ways. It doesn't have to be in real estate. And there's so many different things you can do. I'd always say to rent, and I always find it amazing.
Says the
people
real
buy.
estate expert.
But rental's a big part of the business as well. Real estate companies like us and developers make money when people rent as well. So it's not just about buying. People don't buy offices; they rent them. So residential shouldn't be inherently different to that, I feel.
That's a really nice argument on that. So you would say that Prague is going to be a place where maybe real estate is not such a good investment and people should think about something else?
Yeah, I mean, real estate guys like me tend to be the worst investors, I think, when it comes to stuff. So, I mean, I've got real estate in the UK that hasn't gone up in value for 15 years. So I'm not the best, I think, in terms of that sometimes. I've been lucky in other places, not so lucky there. But look, I think it's a safe investment. But what I'm saying is there's a difference between an investment and where you live. And if you're looking at something as an investment, somebody wants to buy an apartment to lease out. If you're taking a mortgage, that is madness. It just doesn't make sense. The numbers don't work. If you're buying an apartment pure cash, you're very lucky to be able to do it. And it's not a bad investment. The return's decent. You're going to get some capital appreciation. Taxes are relatively low, so it's okay. But there's a difference between, like I say, investing and where you live. And people forget that they should live where they want to live. And if they can afford to rent in a nice part of Prague, they should do it, rather than buying and living in a part of Prague that they don't like. Because at the end of the day, it's, if you're a 30-year-old guy, why buy an apartment in Cherney Most where you don't want to live? Why don't you just rent a flat? And I know people will hate that and they'll think that they're giving money away, but you give money away every day. Yeah. Every time you buy an item of clothing or something, it's the same principle. Yeah. So how much money do you spend and waste? But it's what you see as waste. Is waste buying too many clothes or too many coffees, or is it just spending on rent? And I don't think they're two different things so much. It's people look at it wrong, I believe.
One more thing that I still need to understand is on one hand, you say that Prague is under-rented. And on the other side, you said that it is the most difficult of the cities to build new buildings. How those things are possible?
Well, I think it's been under-rented. It's now catching up because there's always been, like I say, enough supply coming through. But the last few years, it's a mix of two things. Permitting's really difficult. So to build an office building, permitting's really difficult. The other issue is it often doesn't make financial sense today to build an office building because the rent level you have to hit is so high that, again, let's look at Prague 4 as a really good example. You've got tenants in Pankratz that are all paying between 14 to, say, 17. Now, to build a new building in Pankratz, the developer will need to charge 23, 24, 25 euros. Otherwise, his numbers don't work. So you're asking someone to move from a building paying 16 and then go and pay 23, 24. Now, those guys that are paying 16, 17, their rent will eventually go up anyway. But it's not just permitting, it's the cost of construction that's pushing these rent levels up. So it has been under-rented. And I think, like I say, I left in 2008 in this city and I came back in 2021. So I was away for 13 years and the office rents didn't change in that whole time, not once. You look at other markets, they'll be cyclical, they'll go up and down. London went incredibly high, then there were certain drops in different parts, but there's always been movement. Here, nothing changed. The city changed and new places came up and new neighbourhoods improved, but the cost
You said
of
you were
renting,
away for 13 years?
13, yeah.
13 years, and nothing's changed.
No,
nothing. The cost.
The cost didn't. They're now doing it. It's only happened the last 3 or 4 years.
So maybe it's a perception of now the pricings are getting higher and higher.
Yeah. But they're only going to the levels, I think, historically they weren't. There's no reason why Prague should have been 40% lower than Munich or or Berlin or even Warsaw. You know, the rents in these markets were higher, much higher. Vienna. So Prague was always much lower.
And isn't that the income in those cities
because
is so much higher as well?
Yeah, but I think when you're talking about income, I think that mainly impacts more on the residential side.
Yeah, sure.
For offices, you know, if you're Microsoft in Germany and you're Microsoft in Czech, it's still Microsoft. Yes. So the rent level, you can still pay the same rent level, and you're paying lower salaries in places like Czech than you are in Germany. So in essence, there's more room for paying high rent. So I don't think it works quite like that. I think that's purely a residential point when you're looking at salaries. I think that for companies here, for the big corporates, certainly, I think they can afford to pay as much rent here as they can in those markets too.
You left 2008, you came back to Prague 2021. So price-wise, nothing much. It's changing now. It didn't change as much in those 13 years. Yeah. So what changed?
I mean, some parts really, I was surprised didn't. I mean, I know Prague pretty well, so I look at the different districts and how they've kind of moved forward and actually some really haven't changed. I think Prague 5, when I was first here, Prague 5 and Anděl was kind of the Karlín. That was where all the people were moving to. I actually think Anděl as a location, it's strange. And I lived in Karlín, actually. I don't think it's particularly improved at all in that time. I think a lot of the buildings that were built there were kind of in the mid-2000s, and it kind of filled up. And so it's difficult to improve what's there. I think clearly the one place that changed the most was Karlín. I mean, when I was first here, I was leasing. We had a few instructions of leasing offices in Karlín, and they were our biggest challenge. We were leasing in Anděl, we were leasing in Prague 4, Prague 5, even Zličin we were leasing in, but we couldn't lease in Karlín. We couldn't get anybody excited by Karlín. There was the first buildings, kind of was it Amazon Court and Isle House, these first buildings as you come to when you go past the Hilton, they're kind of leased up. But actually when you got into deepest, darkest Karlín, kind of around Kryžíkova and the metro stations in Validovna, these people wouldn't touch it. And so that was a massive, and it just wouldn't. Now. Yeah, you couldn't. I mean, the restaurants were really poor. There was nothing really there to attract people, and that obviously massively changed. And Karlín, to a point now, is more in demand than the centre of Prague. I think it's the most in demand location.
And so, what can you, as a city, what can you do? You have a place that nobody wants. You can't lease there at any office. You call it a dark spot that nobody wants, and suddenly it's such a hub. So did the city make some changes, or was it like one super big startups, then a second, etc.?
It was private enterprise that did that. It wasn't the city. You know, maybe I wasn't here, but I don't think the city did a great deal. I mean, the infrastructure was always there, the metro stations, the tram, which is really vital. It was private enterprise. It was developers building better buildings. It was the fact that it was cheaper there, so people could move, younger people could move into Karlín that couldn't afford Anděl, crazily, if you think about that now. So actually the population was younger. People started moving in. Smaller companies were going in. People were taking advantage of it because it was cheaper. And that kind of grew a different type of environment. And, it's a bit like parts of kind of, you look at places like East Berlin, like those types of places, it was the same thing. It was cheap. A lot of local companies, smaller companies went in because it was cheaper. And it's amazing when you go there now. And I think Karlín's the same. I think Holešovice is on the way of getting there too. But yeah, to me, Karlín was the big one. And I think, the centre of Prague didn't really change. I think places like Prague too didn't really change. But
there's not too many things that can change.
No, the one thing I'm always surprised is Prague 6. I think as an office location, it's always somewhat struggled. It's always been a place that companies have never really moved towards. And
I like how you know Prague better than me.
But I live there now in Prague 6, and it's, you've got, arguably the best university. You've got the technical university there, which has got incredibly good students coming out. And you would think with the universities being in and around it that companies would flock around there. But
like the American model.
Yeah, there isn't anybody like that. So if you look at some of the buildings, I think there's 3 or 4 office buildings that have always there's one kind of did very well, but the rest of them have always kind of struggled a little bit. And I'm always amazed by that, by why Prague 6 has never moved
Maybe they
on.
can change, like same as, around Stanford, it's
of course,
super expensive. Maybe that can happen with Prague 6 as well. You slightly touched the subject of community and co-work. Is that still a thing? Because there was such a thirst, such a burst of co-working spaces, and they all sold themselves based on values and community building, etc. Is that still a thing? Like, do people still want to?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it was. There was that real kind of boom in that, and it's certainly around kind of the first awakenings from COVID, where people started going back to work and realised they didn't want to go back to the same type of environment they were in before, and it did create a different kind of way of thinking and working. WeWork was obviously the big example that kind of, I mean, that was even before that time, and I think they were a victim of COVID rather than a benefactor of it. But I look at Prague, there was some super facilities that were set up. Obviously the Scott Webber guys and what they're doing. Some of their space, to me, I was in their new building last week, and it was incredible. I mean, it was almost felt like a hotel in parts. It was strange to think that it didn't feel like an office building, but I think that's what people want. And the other thing with a lot of this co-working that people don't often see, and certainly with the bigger kind of global groups like WeWork, and WeWork, by the way, has not disappeared. I mean, they're small in Czech, but they're still huge in a lot of markets.
But they are profitable in Czech, which is good.
Yeah, but they're small, and that's a shame they didn't grow more, and it would have been nice to have seen them grow more in the region. But what the difference with people like
there were more issues than COVID with WeWork.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody enjoys reading about WeWork and watching the guy on the movie. But what you don't see in WeWork, actually, and I remember going to see my first WeWork in London, was that 80% of the space was taken up by corporates. And actually it was behind the scenes. You didn't see it. And actually this community side with, gaming and the cool kitchen and all these things was such a tiny proportion.
But that's what I'm talking about. Isn't that like how co-works look like now? Because if you go to Scott and Webber, if you go to WeWork, there's so many companies who are renting offices, and not so much of yoga class starts at 8 and let's do a pop quiz.
I mean, look, you forget in the height of WeWork, their biggest tenant in the US was Bank America. So it wasn't startups, it was corporates. You go to London, most of the big occupiers in places like WeWork were banks. They were taking advantage of flexibility and shorter lease lengths.
And wanted to be cool, maybe?
And wanted to try and be cool and attract new people. But it was corporates that drove that growth with people like WeWork. It wasn't a young startup group, pushing together a new marketing company. It was big global financial institutions.
Because maybe they couldn't have afforded.
But it wasn't. But you couldn't get economy of scale. You couldn't grow to the scale that people wanted to grow on the back of startups. It needed the big corporates.
But maybe you can build a
it.
hype on the back of startups.
Well, look,
and not as much as the business.
I think, in Czech, I think there are some really good operations that are built up around startups, that are much smaller, that their target is much more around startups. I think Scott Webber have done very well kind of combining both. I think that they're attractive to both sides of it. And I think that in terms of locations, they're in different locations to attract different types of people. The stuff they've done down in the park in Chodov, I think, is more for maybe the corporate side of it. And the stuff they've got down in kind of Prague 1 and the centre is more kind of at startups and trying to bring that side of it. So, I think they're all different, but I think Czechs has had a great selection of flex operators, actually. I think there's a risk at times that too many come in too quickly, and I think everybody was kind of getting to that point and worried about that everybody was coming in and trying to do almost the same thing. But I think it needed the breathing space around COVID to kind of slow this down a little bit. But look at them now. Almost all of them are 90%, 95% full.
Yeah. They're all full. That's true. Speaking of WeWork, they tried very hard to communicate themselves as something else than a real estate startup. They promote themselves as space as a service, global platform, and tech-driven data company. Do you find that the real estate topic isn't that hot? To build your cool image upon?
Look, I was 20 years in JLL, which is a huge global organization. And at times, we would be pushing that we were a tech company that specializes in real estate, which in essence we were, because there was so much investment going into tech, certainly into the US, certainly into Silicon Valley. They were buying a lot of companies there. And there is the argument that in essence, big companies like JLL and CBRE are really tech driven. so I mean, you have to invest in tech if you want to keep moving forward. The days of real estate companies putting a banner on the side of a building saying to lease or for sale, I mean, it's unheard of. It's everything is online and tech driven, whether it's CRM systems or it's, you know, it's how we manage our work in hand and how we advertise online. It's all tech. I think what real estate companies, and I'm talking about the consultant side here, are a bit guilty of is pushing it too much, because in essence we're still just real estate agents, and so we're not
tech-driven,
we do have
digital
some
first.
yeah, we do have some kind of tech savvy guys in the office. I wouldn't sound one of them, but in essence it's a human business still, and you know, it goes back to things like working from home or being, you know, we're still a human interaction business. And as much as now people email more, WhatsApp more, or sit in meeting rooms by themselves a lot more, at the end of the day, to do deals, you still need to sit around a table and do the deals. So most of it needs tech behind it to support how we work as a business. So for things like valuation, there's a lot of use of AI because it's a lot of report writing, and we've got to try and kind of improve and make that more efficient. But at the end of the day, you can't do work unless you, I mean, in real estate, unless you're half smart and half a nice guy, and I think then you'll do quite well. And I think you can't do everything through tech.
And what are some tech trends that you see now in real estate?
I mean, look, I think the AI obviously encompasses so much, and I think people think of AI just as ChatGPT, but it encompasses so much more. For us, it's about efficiency. I mean, which is good and bad. I mean, you look at companies like ours, and there is the argument with AI that companies like ours could become redundant over time, because, you know, like I said, a big part of our business is valuing assets. So it's underwriting, it's reading countless leases, it's going through tenancy schedules, very complex calculations with the banks and the investors. And we've got big teams to do that. You know, I think we have 15 of just in Prague doing that side of it for us. That will slowly change over time, and AI will come in and make that more efficient. It will never be
just 15 people for the calculation.
Just for reading leases, calculations, this thing. So, and it's a big part of the business. It's a difficult business because there's a lot of pressure on values. You know, people expect big increases at times, and when the markets go down, they expect no difference. And so, it's a real challenge. And that's when AI can't come in, because at the end of the day, valuation is all about opinion, and there's a lot of pressure often on valuers depending on the market, whether you're valuing a house or you're valuing office buildings. And I think there's a line where AI draws, and I think when it comes to opinion, I don't think you can do that. I don't think that's an AI point. But certainly for us, it's more about efficiency. You know,
so it's efficiency, but in the end, you still need to sit with people in a conference room
we do.
and discuss.
I mean, look, we still need someone to take some. Look, it's almost like real kind of simple, what we call a state agency in England. If you're trying to lease an office, like you're trying to lease an apartment, you still need to take the people there and show them it. Like, it can't all be done online. It's still a human business. You know, it's not like accounting or tax, which is often behind the scenes, and you'll work with people for years without ever meeting them. In our business, it's all about human interaction. So it's a bricks and mortar business. So we have to be there. We have to see the buildings. So AI is obviously having a massive impact.
AI bricks and mortar business.
Yeah, of course. But all these different slogans, I heard some amazing ones over the past few weeks. You know, it used to be survive to 25, then it's no bricks to 26, I heard this week. And well, yeah, they're endless. But it's, I think AI will have an impact, and I think it'll result in more efficiency, probably cost saving for companies like ours. You know, and I think it remains to be seen the next few years. But for sure, it's having an impact, I would say, in the last 18 months. And I think we need to embrace it. And the ones that embrace it will survive and do well. And the ones that don't will wither and die. And I think you'll see a lot of that.
Maybe next year. Do the bricks and mortar business change how you do sales? Is it like, where does it differ from selling an online product or commodity?
Yeah, look, it really depends. I mean, we had a famous story during COVID where we were selling a quite high-profile office building in Prague, and we sold it to a German investor. Now, I'm saying there, it's a human business, a human interaction. The German investor didn't even come to see the building. Actually, they bought that building on the back of Excel. Like the numbers worked, to go through the underwriting, and the returns worked for them. And they bought it without seeing it. And you do get parts of that. You'll get big investment groups buying portfolios of assets, often without seeing them. And that side of it is amazing to think about, that people are spending tens, if not hundreds of millions on assets without having seen it. But it's because they're looking at it as an investment vehicle, not as bricks and mortar. So it really depends on the sector. Look, for occupiers, clearly everything's about the physical side of it. But for investors and banks, often, obviously with banks, they're financing development that doesn't yet exist. So they're basing everything on a spreadsheet and some images, and hoping that the business plan will work. And so that's generally what the bank's role is in development, is to believe in a project based upon a set of numbers and some images and some plans.
Is that the biggest cash cow, the dream client? Those investors that invest money, buy a building based on Excel sheets?
Well, I mean, our dream client, and I suppose it's always been the same. It's our dream client's the guy that we sell the land to, we help build the building for them. We lease the building and then we sell the building, and we maybe manage the building in the process. That's the dream. And that's, and there are very few times where you'll tick every box. We've done it a handful of times, I would say, in this market over the years, because there'll always be part you miss. And there's always, and that point of what I said earlier, that people, especially developers, especially in Czech, which you've got this kind of big domestic groups now here, and they're doing everything themselves. And so the dream client of the land until the sale of the building is becoming increasingly rare, because there's less parts of that process for us to get involved in as advisors.
So that's the best client. Who is the worst client?
I would say that the more difficult clients are the ones that at times not based in the market. And that's not a criticism of them. I mean, you've got certainly some of the big global occupiers will have real estate teams based places like the UK or the US or Germany or Asia, and it's wrong to think that they should be experts of every market they've got offices in, because they can be in hundreds of markets. At times they can be a dream client because they put so much faith into us that there's a real belief and faith that we'll do the right thing, and that's why we have these long-standing relationships with them. At times there can be people that don't, like Prague's a very specific market. Like I said, the rent's never increased. So they'll look at the history of their leases and they'll think, okay, the rent's never increased for 15 years. Why all of a sudden is it going up 30% this time? Yeah. Because they don't understand the market, and they're not seeing that happening in other markets. And so actually I would say the more difficult clients are the ones that just don't understand the market reality here, because it is really specific. Prague, it is undersupplied. It is a very valuable market because you've got a lot of Czech investors that are outbidding foreign investors. So foreign investors, everybody says that foreign investors are not looking at Czech. They are. They just can't afford to buy here because Czech investors are paying more. And so when we're selling, we sold our building, Myslbek, this beginning of this year. We sold it to Czechs. The Czechs were the most aggressive bidders on that. Palladium now being sold to Czech investors. Almost everything that goes to the open market goes to Czechs, because they're willing to pay more for assets in their home market than foreigners. And that's not to say that German investors don't want to come to Czech. It's just they don't understand why they should be paying more in Prague than they do in Berlin. And for them, and I get that.
And that's where we are. That's our situation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is the problem. I mean, you'll always pay more in your own market. Czech's got currency risk. It's not euro denominated. It is. A lot of investors still look at it like it's an Eastern market, so they'll price a little bit of risk into it. Politically, you look at the countries around, you look at recent elections, and people think they're not sure which way that could go, and so they will price a bit more risk in the market. But Czech investors don't. That we've not seen Czech investors paying softer pricing because Babiš has just won an election. The pricing stays the same, but I suspect German and British investors might do. And I think that's
you thought that why should they pay, the foreign investors, why should they pay more than they pay in Berlin? So that was my question. Is it currently higher to buy in Prague than in Berlin?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, look, I always even though I've not lived in the UK for a long time, I always compare everything to the UK. And when I look at residential prices in Brno being higher than Edinburgh, to me, I'm thinking, how can that possibly make sense? Like, how can a regional city in the Czech Republic be selling apartments higher level than prime Edinburgh, which is the second richest city in the UK? You know, London's always going to be different because it's this kind of big global world city, but you know, markets like Manchester, Leeds, big cities of, you know, populations of, you know, 2.5 million people, it's cheaper to buy there than it is in Prague, a city of 1.3 million. You know, but it's a capital city. There's a lot of wealth here, and I think that's underestimated. But you know, everybody says the same. Nobody can quite understand and grasp from outside how expensive buying in the Czech Republic is. How many tourists come here and love the city, like everybody does. Every time you go on holiday to somewhere nice, often you'll start looking on the internet how much an apartment or a house is. I wonder how many people come to Czech thinking they'll buy a nice apartment in the old town and then realise it's 10,000 euros a square metre, and it's almost the same price as Notting Hill. Yeah. Like it's a massive surprise to people.
But that is a trend that you see now, right? Because in the past you said it was way cheaper than it was supposed to be on the open market. So now it's like the last 3-5 years. Where do you see this
gradual
trend?
Yeah, I think it's look, it's I'm not quite sure where it can go in terms of pricing. You know, I was always quite negative around residential because I just couldn't see how high it was going to go. I never thought that we would get to the point where, as a city average, and I'm talking the whole city, we're now at nearly 6,000 euros a square metre in terms of an average. I never thought for a second we could get to that point, and I would tell people that too. But I was proved wrong. So, you know, I always believed in the UK market, which hasn't seen any growth in 10-15 years. And that's where I invested. So I'm not always the right guy to talk to, but that's your emotional purchasing. That's me being an emotional buyer, even though I'm a real estate advisor, being emotional about my purchase of thinking I'll buy back home because that's where I feel safer. And that's where I feel safest with my investments, which in reality was the wrong thing to do. But this is why Czechs are willing to pay more in Prague than foreigners are, because they have emotional... You know, I was living in Belgrade for quite a few years, and that was the same thing. The market was driven by the Serbian diaspora. This was Serbians living in the US, in Austria, in Sweden, and a lot of them left.
Yeah, and they were buying...
And the first thing they do when they get money is to buy it in their homeland, because they've got this emotional attachment to it. And that was driving a lot of the pricing. I don't think that's what Czechs do. I think Czechs that leave, and I don't think many Czechs do actually leave, but the ones that do, I don't think have an emotional attachment to buy real estate in Prague. I don't think they have the same feeling. But certainly the people here have got much more belief in the market. And but that's what I would do. And I think, you know, a lot of, when it comes to residential, it's about emotion. And it's about, you know, this goes back to my point earlier about renting rather than buying. People should be more emotional around it, and less business sense, and start thinking about, you know, quality of life and where they want to live. And I think it's an emotional part of it. And I think that's why people should be renting apartments and not thinking about paying money to other people in their Excel spreadsheet and what impact it has, but actually just thinking about, you know, their quality of life and where they want to live.
Yeah, I just signed my mortgage half a year ago, but that's all right.
Well, I hope it's somewhere where you want to live.
I hope as well, but you know, life changes. One famous investor that I tend to listen to, and famous entrepreneur, podcaster Scott Galloway, said that the worst thing that can happen to young people is remote work. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. It's a strange one. I mean, when I look back, and okay, I started working at a different time, I suppose, but when I started working at 22. So I came straight out of university and I was ready to work, because right through my education, even from when I was 10, 12 years old at school, we were being taught how to manage a shop, you know, run basic P&L, like how to run a business. We were working at 15, 16 in retail, and we were everything. It might sound a bit sad, but when we were at university, I did quite a specialist degree, and everything was about being a chartered surveyor and getting into real estate. And so when I'd finished, I was ready to work, and I went straight into it. I think today there's a combination of two things. One is, I think a lot of graduates are coming out of university quite old. You know, in the UK, we go to university for 3 years and then we work. So
Because
often,
you pay for them.
yeah, well, yeah, but often, but you start, you know, as a graduate, I got on the graduate scheme at 22. Everybody else was 22. We weren't 26. We were 22 and we started working. When I was 25, I was already in Czech running a team. Like we were educated differently and we were ready to work. And I think in Czech, there's a combination of people spending quite a long time at university. You know, everybody does a master's. In the UK, nobody did a master's. You did a master's if you chose the wrong degree and you wanted to change it. People here often, so people are coming out of work relatively older, you know, at 20, and it's not old. I mean, coming out of university and getting your first job at 25, 26.
And they're prolonging their studies because...
Yeah, they do. And it's, and actually...
Makes sense for them.
It's they needed to be ready earlier, and I think people are coming out of university unprepared for work because they've spent too much time in the education system and not enough time kind of, you know, work is when the real pressure begins. And I think graduates are coming out, so fresh graduates are really smart and offer something completely different to us, but I'm often quite surprised by how unprepared they are for working in an office and talking to clients and these things. You know, I was thrown in front of clients when I was 22 and thrown in at the deep end. I had a great boss at the time who taught me really well, but you were really thrown into it and expected to perform. Here, you're kind of in the background and you're not people don't have the confidence to get forward and to meet people. And you combine that with...
You think that's a Czech thing or a generational thing?
I think it's a bit of both, honestly. Yeah. I think it is a generational thing. I think yes, graduates today are different than graduates when I came in early 2000s. You know, we had that very kind of British stiff upper lip mentality and we were expected to go in and start working. And it was a very male dominated business we were in at the time as well. And it's totally different than that now. And a lot of that was really terrible and wrong and some of the experiences we had. But I think it is a bit of a Czech thing. I think that people do stay at university too long and do start working too late and a bit unprepared. And it takes them longer to adjust to working life. And they might end up with 2 or 3 jobs before they find their place. Whereas if they start earlier, you've already gone through those 2 or 3 jobs and you found your place at 25, 26 rather than at 30. So I think that's a problem. And then when you combine working from home, which is a real problem in some sectors. I mean, I battle with it constantly. I struggle to work from home. And this is my problem. I don't enjoy it. I need to be around people. I think I don't work well by myself. And so I have criticism in my office that I automatically then think that people aren't working when they're at home, where of course they are. It's just I'm not very good at doing it. And so I have quite a negative view of it myself because I'm not great at doing it. But when you add that kind of mentality that people aren't quite ready to work, plus the fact they don't come to work, it's a recipe for disaster from my side. It just means they're not maturing in a work environment. And I think that will impact them going forward too. So I hated the fact that I was 22 and I was already working really hard and my boss was on top of me and I was getting trained and I was being thrown in at the deep end. But it did the world for me in terms of understanding how to deal with difficult situations and complex clients. And I was already doing that. So when I came to Prague when I was 25, I'd already been in pitches and difficult meetings and had my fair share of criticism and shouts and these things. I'd been through it all, so I had quite tough skin. And so when I came to Czech, it was no problem for me having been in these difficult situations. But I can't imagine...
Were they the same difficult?
Yeah, but I can't imagine many 25-year-olds today running a team of 7, 8 people, all of which are older
dealing with these difficult situations.
I was 25, I took a team of 7, 8 Czechs. I think that was wrong, actually. I don't think I was quite prepared for that either. I think it was unfair for those guys to have a 25-year-old English guy turn up and be the boss, but those were the times. But I grew up so quickly on the back of it. But I was also prepared. I was prepared because I'd already been working for 3 years and I'd also been in an education that prepared me differently for work. And so as a 25-year-old, I was quite mature from a business side of it. And so that's
how do you deal with that in IO Partners? Because I can imagine that you have some young people. So do you just throw them? Do you believe that you should just throw in the water, send them to difficult meetings and, shake them up, or offer them more education, hold them by the hand and show them around? What do you believe in? I
mean, I'd love to think it's the first one, but I don't think it's realistic anymore. At the end of the day, real estate is not rocket science. It's not. It's in essence, it's the buying and leasing of real estate. There are other parts. There's the valuation, the management, the project management, these types of things. But in essence, where we make our dollars is leasing and selling of office buildings. That's where we make most of the money. And it's a very human business. And so the work we do is not difficult, actually, at times. There are parts of it. Selling office buildings and shopping centres is a very complex business. But with the right training, most people can do it. It's not the medical profession or, tax and accounting, which is a bit different. It's, by its very essence, it's not so difficult. It's the human interaction that's the important part. And I've always said it, unless people like you, nobody will want to work with you in real estate. Nobody wants to work with difficult people. And the guys that are very technical, gifted, tend to stay in the back and be back office people. The guys that tend to do better and get the promotions and get the bigger clients and the bigger instructions are the guys that can be kind of almost chameleon at times, that can be adjusting to different situations. And I think the only way you can get people to do that is to throw them into the deep end and get them in front of different types of people. If we coddle them and almost, I don't know, I was watching an interview with somebody in the UK recently where he was talking about how as a society we celebrate failure, that people will go on social media almost celebrating that they failed the driving test or these things, and we celebrate it, and I think that to a point is not ideal. And
maybe that's it, like that the thing fail forward.
Yeah,
that we keep being fed. You need to fail to move forward.
Yeah.
You need to fail, but it doesn't mean the celebration of the failure
no, I
itself.
know, and I think there is
Maybe,
a bit of that.
yeah.
People will almost look for sympathy and success around that, around failure. Look, failing forward is the right term, I've failed forward many times. Like it's not that I've always done everything right. There's so many mistakes everybody makes. I think but you need to fail enough times at the beginning to not fail again. And so only by going at the deep end, being a guy in the background who sits at home 3 days a week means there's very little room for you to fail in anything, because you're playing safe. And especially in this business, I mean, there are jobs you can do from home. I get that. Like there are jobs, people that work in shared service centres, call centres, they can do that job from home. They don't need to be around people. And I completely respect that. But in our business, in human interaction, whether it's, lawyers, real estate guys, accountants, you have to be in and around the people, and you have to be at work. And I don't think you can fail forward unless you're in the office.
You mentioned when you were starting at 22, that the real estate people were really hard guys, shouting and everything. And this changed? Are they nice people?
Completely.
Nice people now?
Like I said, I had a brilliant boss when I started, and I owe a lot to him. And he was at times, I saw him recently, and I was saying about how he used to be quite tough on me, and he was quite shocked that I said that. But he was a lot stricter on me than certainly I am today. And he was strict at me at the right things, and he criticised me because it was justified. He wasn't criticising because he was wrong. He would often have the go at the right things. But yeah, you've got to be a lot more sympathetic, I think, as a leader these days. It's but I think that's always been in my nature. I think you do all these when you work in big kind of global companies like I have for a long time, you often go on these different training courses, and all of a sudden they'll put you as a colour that you're yellow or green, and I've always been kind of in that kind of the sympathetic leader type bracket, and that's just always the way that I've done it.
Maybe because you have such a hard boss, and you were
I mean, look back,
more.
I'm sure there was way harder. I mean, I was really lucky with the one I had, but it was in those days in property, especially in the UK, it was a really old-fashioned type of business. People often got in through their family connections, and it was a very old school type of business. I wanted to work in London when I first started, and I got through the kind of as a graduate onto the graduate scheme. But it was made very clear during some interviews that I would be better up north than I would in London, because I had this kind of very strong kind of northeast accent, and I was kind of from a much more working class background. Yeah, because I think in those days you kind of had to be from the right
family.
It was the way you talked, the way you were educated, and I was different. I came through a very working class education, and I had it's different now because
I thought it's like you have an accent, I have a tweed jacket.
I've learned to tone my accent down because it was so strong that people couldn't understand anything I was saying, especially when I came here. So I had to really learn how to say words again and just to make it a little bit more simple for people. So when I go home, I'm really self-conscious about that. But look, it was really different times then, and but that was real estate in general. It was a very kind of macho business, and it was often through these family connections, and it was there was always a ceiling, and it was very difficult to break through that. And that was why I left. That's why I came to Prague when I was 25, because I was quite ambitious, and I knew I couldn't get to where I needed to get to by just staying there, because there would always be that ceiling for me in those times. And so that's why I came into Czech and then moved around the Balkans, because I was going to markets that were quite new, that actually put a real positive spin on people from abroad coming in. And when you were here, there was a lot in Prague, but when I went down to places like Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, Croatia, I was I think the only one. And so you had kind of a USP that you were kind of the Johnny Foreigner, and it worked in your favour a lot of the time, and I think that helped. But certainly the way you communicate with people these days, certainly with the younger people, has changed. But I don't particularly have a problem with it, because I've always been quite a friendlier type of boss. It's how I've always worked, and I've always had that kind of trust with the people.
Did you hire a professional to like lower down your accent?
No, I'm not the Theranos lady or anything like that. No, I didn't. What happened was when I first moved to Czech, I had a British boss who was from a different type of background than I was, and I think in the first week he said I either need to learn Czech or English, because nobody could understand anything I said. So my accent was really strong. I'd always been up north. Grew up in the northeast. I was at university in Sheffield in Yorkshire, so I had this real strong accent, and it was.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
I still go back to it, but then it's only when I'm back, and I'll quickly come out of it, because it just made my life so difficult for people.
I know exactly what you're talking about, because I used to work in Alaska with two British guys from North. Don't remember the cities exactly, but they had such a thick accent that the Americans wanted me to translate for them. It's a great position. Loved it. Is there your dream place, your dream building that you would love to have an office in?
Do you know, when we renewed our office recently, and we've been there a long time, and in Prague, we've had, like every company, ups and downs, and I think I felt it was time that we maybe look for a change. And I wanted to move to Karlín because I thought it would be a good signal for us to kind of get out of of Prague one and show that we were kind of not an old-fashioned kind of business, but we were looking at new ways, and we were, if we're telling our occupiers they should be going to these places, then we should be going to them too. But there was a real feeling, I think, within the business and generally in this sector that we should all be in the centre of Prague. The lawyers tended to have felt like that too, a few have moved out, but it's almost, if you leave the centre of Prague, for companies like ours, you were deemed a failure, or it's because you couldn't afford the rents in the centre of Prague. We're actually in Karlín, the rents are even higher.
But the investors should see you as fiscally responsible, but no. But
in terms of buildings, I mean, there are some super buildings in the centre, but it's, I don't know, it's always been home, and there's so much emotional attachment to that building. I mean, I've got guys in the office that have been there for nearly 30 years, and they've just been in that building, and there's so much. I've probably got 10, 15 people that have been 15, 20 years in the office, and they've got such an emotional attachment to it that it would almost be breaking their hearts to move out. So I quickly realised maybe that we should stay. So I don't think we'll ever.
Yeah, that's the emotions you were talking about.
Like I say, the first lease was in Deutschmarks. That's how long we've been there. And I think, who knows what currency our last lease will be in, but I can't see us ever moving out of that building. We've been there for so long. It's, and it's good. I mean, it's central Prague. It's right on the high street. So there's worse places.
You could be like more far-fetched. You could do, Houses of Parliament and Prague Castle, but you want,
We were looking at maybe splitting it, that we would take some flex space. We would have a kind of a downtown address, and we would take flex space in another part of Prague. And so we looked at so many different scenarios that we would look. We were looking at, space. Going into Polišovice at one point. We would take some space there and then retain the rest of the space in. Skanska built a super building down on the river near Stromovka, this Port 7 in Holešovice. Brilliant. And I think they've done a great job with it, and I would love to have gone somewhere like that. Only 'cause
I like
could,
the term flex space.
Yeah, only because I would run or cycle there maybe, but rather than get the metro in. But yeah, but we decided to stay, so I think we'll always be there.
Andrew, my final question for you is: what is the weirdest food you've ever eaten? Food, yes. As a British fella, I can imagine must be a ton of it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think on my travels, I've travelled a lot around Asia. I wouldn't say I've eaten anything that's different than anybody else, whether I've been in kind of Thailand or India or Vietnam. I think the weirdest food is the food that I don't think is weird at all, but everybody else does.
Okay.
And so that's kind of the food that I eat when I'm back home. So, whether it's things like beans on toast, which I think is still my favourite meal in the world. I also, my what do you call it? When you're on death row, my last meal would be sausage, chips, and beans. That's just how I like it from when I was young, and also the UK is home of Greg's the Bakers, which is the bakery which I absolutely love. So I could live on their sausage rolls and steak bakes.
Hopefully you won't be on a death row.
Yeah, so I
you don't
think,
need to eat this.
I don't think my food's weird at all, but I think other people probably look at it as quite bland and boring. But I don't think so at all.
Andrew Peirson, beans on toast. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.